It started with a whisper, a faint, seemingly inconsequential signal, lost among the cosmic static of deep space. But the moment it was detected by Earth's most powerful deep space observatories, the world knew something was different. The signal had structure. It wasn't random noise or a natural phenomenon. This was deliberate, intelligent, and it was coming from a star system that was light years away, beyond human reach. Dr. Evelyn Carter, the lead scientist at the United Earth Space Observatory, was the first to notice. A sudden spike in electromagnetic frequencies, followed by a cascade of precisely timed pulses. Her eyes widened in disbelief as the data streamed in. The signal was too coherent to be a fluke, too calculated to be anything but a message. Within hours, news spread like wildfire. Nations across the globe turned their attention to the discovery. Earth's governments, once divided by petty rivalries, suddenly united in the face of the unknown. Global space agencies began working together, pooling their resources. The excitement was palpable, yet so was the undercurrent of fear. What was out there? Who had sent the message? And more importantly, why? The signal itself was unlike anything Earth scientists had ever encountered. It wasn't in any known language, nor was it encrypted in any standard code. It was a mix of mathematical patterns, harmonic frequencies and images, fractals, geometric designs, and a series of coordinates. The more the signal was decoded, the clearer the message became. It wasn't just an invitation. It was a beacon, guiding them toward something. A location in the farthest reaches of the galaxy. The coordinates pointed to a star system known as Ceros, a star that had long been ignored by astronomers, as it seemed to have no planets of interest. Yet the signal suggested there was something there. Something hidden, waiting. As humanity struggled to understand what this could mean, questions flooded the minds of the world's leaders. Was it a trap, a test, or something even more unsettling? An invitation to join something far greater than anything Earth had ever imagined. The excitement soon turned to urgency. The race to respond began immediately. A unified international team of scientists, engineers, and military strategists was formed to plan an expedition to Ceros. An armada of ships, both military and scientific, was assembled, each one equipped with the latest technology. The journey would take years, and yet there was no hesitation. Humanity had been given its chance, and they would not squander it. As preparations for the expedition took shape, one thing was clear. The signal was just the beginning. Earth's eyes were now fixed on the stars, and whatever lay at the end of the coordinates, humanity was ready to face it head-on. The unknown had been unveiled, and they would venture forth into it, no matter the cost. The world watched with bated breath as the countdown began. Dr. Carter, the scientist who had first discovered the signal, stood on the observation deck, staring up at the night sky. The stars twinkled back at her, as if to remind her of the magnitude of what was about to unfold. She could only wonder, what lay beyond the darkness, waiting to be discovered, and would humanity be ready for the truth? The journey to Ceros had begun, and the fate of the human race hung in the balance. The stars were calling. The fleet set sail under a blanket of starlit night, their sleek vessels cutting through the vast emptiness of space. Humanity had never undertaken a journey so monumental. The Armada, 5 ships in total, including the Erebus, a colossal battleship designed for both defense and exploration, and the Artemis, a science vessel with cutting-edge research technology, was Earth's most advanced space expedition yet. Each ship carried the hopes of billions, but also an unspoken fear. They were traveling into the unknown, guided only by coordinates that could lead to answers, or doom. The journey was long and perilous. The fleet departed Earth's orbit, leaving behind the safety of home. As the ships ventured deeper into the void, the familiar sights of the solar system faded into the distance, swallowed by the oppressive blackness of space. The initial awe soon turned into a grueling reality. Months of travel, isolation, and tension among the crew. Inside the Erebus, The crew worked tirelessly to maintain the ship's systems, which were constantly tested by the harsh conditions of deep space. Commander Jonah Harris, a grizzled veteran with a reputation for calm under pressure, led the crew with a steady hand. However, even he couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease that settled in every corner of the ship. The mission was an enigma. No one knew what awaited them at the end of the journey, and the further they traveled, the more ominous the silence became. Dr. Evelyn Carter, now aboard the Artemis, worked alongside a team of scientists and engineers, analyzing the signal's remaining fragments and searching for any new clues. Her obsession with the message grew stronger each day. She spent countless hours in the ship's lab, poring over data, mapping out potential star systems. The more she studied the signal, the more convinced she became that this was not a simple invitation. It was a challenge, a test, and the unknown entity behind it had been waiting for humanity to respond. But why? Meanwhile, on the Erebus, the crew struggled with the monotony of space travel. Weeks passed without any significant changes, and the tension grew palpable. An accident in the engine room sparked fears of a malfunction, causing panic among the crew. Engineers scrambled to fix the systems, while rumors spread like wildfire. As the fleet continued its journey toward the coordinates, the magnitude of what lay ahead became undeniable. Weeks passed, and the tension aboard the ships grew. Crew members huddled together in small groups, whispering theories, debating the purpose of the mysterious message they had received. Was it a welcoming gesture or a warning? The uncertainty gnawed at everyone, though they remained resolute, fueled by the promise of discovery. Then, on the 6th month of their journey, it came into view. The first ship appeared as a mere speck against the backdrop of stars, but as the fleet drew closer, the enormity of it struck like a wave crashing against the shore. It was an impossibility. No human mind could have conceived of something so vast. The ship's massive silhouette loomed over them, dwarfing their fleet like a shadow cast over a city. It was beyond anything humanity had ever built, easily large enough to engulf entire planets, its outer hull a seamless, glimmering surface that shimmered in the light of distant stars. And there were more. Stretching beyond the limits of the eye, an entire fleet of these massive starships drifted in perfect, haunting formation, orbiting each other in a dance that suggested order, precision, and an ancient purpose. The ships were silent, their lights dim and erratic, but alive with the hum of machinery that had not been powered down for centuries. Dr. Carter, aboard the Artemis, was the first to break the silence. "There, enormous," she whispered, unable to tear her eyes away from the sight. She had studied the signal for months, but nothing could have prepared her for the awe-inspiring reality of the ships. These aren't ships in the traditional sense. They're something else, like colossal, interstellar cities. Entire ecosystems might exist inside them. Her words echoed in the minds of the crew as they continued to close in on the fleet. Every member of the expedition was in a state of shock, their eyes glued to the view screens as they tried to make sense of the impossible. Commander Harris stood at the helm of the Erebus, his brow furrowed as he attempted to maintain control over the fleet. "Keep your distance," he ordered, voice steady but tense. "We don't know what we're dealing with here." But there was no avoiding the fact that the ships were close now, far closer than anyone had anticipated. The starships loomed larger and larger, filling the view screens, their vast, sleek forms impossible to comprehend. The ships were covered in intricate designs, geometric patterns that shimmered across their surfaces, some faded with age, others still glowing faintly with alien energy. They were relics of a civilization far older than humanity, and the eerie silence surrounding them felt both beautiful and foreboding. When the Erebus made its final approach to one of the starships, the crew was shaken by a sudden transmission. This time, not a voice, but a series of holographic symbols projected across their bridge. They were images, a language perhaps, or a form of communication, but entirely incomprehensible. As the symbols danced across the air, the crew stared in awe, unsure whether they were being welcomed or warned. "Everyone, stay alert." Harris's voice broke through the stunned silence. "We're about to make contact with something much older than we are. Prepare for anything." The first attempt at communication was met with a resounding silence, but then something changed. The ships, seemingly lifeless up until now, began to stir. A distant hum reverberated through the fleet, and the stars surrounding them flickered in strange patterns. For the first time since their arrival, the crew aboard the Erebus felt something they hadn't expected: movement. Suddenly, a wave of energy washed over the fleet. It was subtle, like a ripple in the fabric of space itself, but it was enough to send shockwaves through their systems. The lights in the ship flickered, and an overwhelming sense of being watched settled over them. "Something's responding," Dr. Carter said, her voice trembling with awe and anxiety. "But it's not human. Whatever it is, it's alive, in a way we can't even begin to understand." As the energy pulse reverberated through their ships, it became clear that they were not simply in the presence of alien starships. They had awakened something far more ancient and powerful than they had ever imagined. The fleet had ventured beyond the limits of human understanding, and now they were no longer alone in the dark void of space. The real journey was just beginning. It was like a dormant beast had been stirred from its long, deep sleep. The moment the energy pulse washed over the fleet, something within the massive ship shifted. The calm, eerie silence that had pervaded the space around them for months was broken by the hum of unseen machinery. Lights that had been dim for eons blinked back to life, flickering in slow, deliberate patterns. The ships themselves seemed to pulse with energy, as though they were alive, breathing, waiting. The enormity of the moment settled into the crew, a heavy weight in the pit of their stomachs. They were no longer simply explorers. They were intruders in an ancient alien world. Dr. Carter watched in awe from the Artemis as the ship stirred. Her mind raced with the possibilities. "It's alive," she whispered. "The ships themselves. They're not just machines. They're part of something much bigger, something biological." "Maybe," Harris replied, standing beside her. "But what exactly are we waking up? We don't know what kind of force we're dealing with here." The crew aboard the Erebus was equally on edge. Communications flickered in and out as the ship's systems struggled to adjust to the unexpected energy surge. The holographic symbols from the earlier transmission began to shift once more, forming new patterns that now pulsed with even greater intensity. They were not random. There was intent behind every movement, every shift of light. The crew couldn't ignore the fact that these ships, these colossal vessels, were somehow reacting to their presence. It wasn't just the energy pulse. It was a presence, something intangible but undeniably real. The sensation that they were being watched grew stronger with each passing second, and it wasn't just a feeling. Their sensors began picking up strange readings. The gravitational fields around them were shifting, subtly at first, but enough to be noticed. It was as if the ships were alive, not just in the physical sense, but in some deeper, more incomprehensible way. Suddenly, a voice crackled through the Erebus communication system. It was not a human voice, but something alien, distorted by static, like a distant echo from the past. The words were garbled, and it was clear the translation systems couldn't handle it. But a single phrase broke through the noise, chilling and unmistakable. "Prepare to be judged." The voice repeated, once again garbled and distorted. But the meaning was clear. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a request. It was a command. Something out there, on the other side of this vast alien technology, was waiting, judging, and humanity was in its sights. Dr. Carter's breath caught in her throat. The implications were enormous. Judged for what? She murmured aloud, but no one had an answer. Commander Harris stood rigid at the helm of the Erebus, eyes narrowing. "Whatever this is, it's far beyond anything we've encountered. These ships, they don't belong to any species we've ever studied. They were built by a civilization that has long since fallen. But something about their technology, it's still alive. And it's watching us. A few of the crew members began to mutter among themselves, their fears rising. What was this judgment? Were they being evaluated as potential allies, or as intruders to be wiped out? The prospect of being evaluated, of being judged, hit hard. The crew of the Erebus realized that the journey they'd embarked upon had far greater stakes than they'd anticipated. As the hum of the ships intensified, the fleet drifted closer to one of the enormous starships. It was the size of a small moon, its surface covered with strange markings that resembled an ancient script. The ship's surface seemed to ripple with an unnatural energy, like a living thing moving just beneath the surface. "Do we engage?" Harris asked, his voice calm but tinged with an underlying tension. Before anyone could respond, the ship's surface opened. A massive glowing door, bigger than any human structure, parted to reveal a corridor stretching into the heart of the starship. The energy field surrounding the door shimmered as though it were alive, inviting the fleet to enter. The crew on the Erebus exchanged looks, all of them aware that they had crossed a threshold. The invitation, if it could be called that, was clear. The time for cautious observation was over. It was time to enter the ship. Dr. Carter swallowed hard, her mind racing. The judgment had begun. But what would humanity's place be in this ancient cosmic drama? What lay beyond that door? They didn't know. But one thing was certain. The moment they stepped forward, there would be no turning back. The crew aboard the Erebus stood frozen as the massive door before them continued to open. The glowing edges flickered like the pulse of a distant star, casting eerie shadows across the ship's hull. The invitation was unmistakable. Whatever lay inside was waiting for them. The hum of energy from the massive starships surrounding them intensified, resonating through the hull of the Erebus like a heartbeat, rhythmic and deep, pulling at the crew's collective consciousness. "Commander," Dr. Carter's voice broke through the tense silence. "We can't turn back now. If we don't enter, we might never get another chance to learn what this place is." Jonah Harris, despite his years of experience in high-stakes missions, felt the weight of the decision press down on him. There was no protocol for this, no precedent. He turned to face his crew, his gaze unwavering despite the gravity of the moment. "We came here to explore. We came to learn. And now we're going to do just that. But stay alert. We have no idea what we're walking into." The crew nodded in reluctant agreement, their faces a mix of fear and anticipation. This wasn't like any first contact humanity had ever prepared for. This was something older, more mysterious, and far more dangerous. Yet curiosity was a powerful force. It drove them forward. The ships docked in a carefully coordinated maneuver. The Erebus approached the glowing door, its massive bulk dwarfing the entrance, and slowly began to align itself with the starship's massive opening. The energy field surrounding the door shimmered and pulsed, alive with power that seemed to resist the presence of the Erebus. But after a moment, the energy barriers dissipated, allowing the ships to pass. Once inside, the Erebus docked at the edge of an enormous hangar bay. The room was cavernous, its size beyond anything human construction could achieve. It was as if they had stepped into a giant's lair, a place so vast, so alien, it defied comprehension. Above them, the ceiling was high and distant, the walls lined with strange, glowing symbols that moved and shifted, like living things. The hangar floor, however, was perfectly smooth, made of a material that reflected their ship's lights with an eerie glow. It was quiet here, unnervingly quiet, as if the very air held its breath. "We're inside," Harris murmured, staring at the unfamiliar environment. "I'll initiate a scan of the area. Dr. Carter, I need you to start analyzing these symbols." Dr. Carter didn't need to be told twice. She was already absorbed in the alien symbols covering the walls, her mind racing with possibilities. She had theorized that these ships might be older than any civilization she had ever studied, but seeing it firsthand was overwhelming. The technology was beyond anything Earth could comprehend. It was a perfect marriage of organic and synthetic, a fusion of life and machine that transcended human understanding. "Commander," Dr. Carter said, her voice tinged with awe and excitement. These symbols, they're not just a language. They're a map, a history. It's showing something. Someone. This starship is alive, built to serve its purpose for eternity. But in the process, it's become something more. Harris nodded grimly. And we're standing in the heart of it. The door to the hangar hissed as it closed behind them, sealing the fleet inside. The Erebus and the Artemis were now alone in this vast, mysterious space. But the silence was oppressive, and the deeper the crew ventured into the ship's depths, the more the sense of being watched intensified. Every sound, every footstep seemed magnified in the cavernous space. "Shut down all non-essential systems," Harris ordered. "We don't know if they're scanning us, or if we're walking into some kind of trap. Stay on high alert." As the crew proceeded, their boots clanged on the metallic floor, breaking the stillness. They passed through a series of chambers, each more extraordinary than the last. The walls were lined with massive arrays of unknown machinery, glowing softly with a light that seemed to radiate from the heart of the ship. But there were no signs of life. No crew, no inhabitants, nothing to indicate who had built this ship or what their intentions were. Eventually, they reached a massive chamber at the center of the vessel, a room that dwarfed all the others. At the far end stood an imposing structure, a pedestal-like formation surrounded by strange, shimmering symbols. Atop it, a crystalline object pulsed with an ethereal glow, suspended in midair. "Is this it?" Dr. Carter breathed, her voice barely a whisper. "This is something important. I can feel it." Harris stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the object. "Whatever it is, it's not just technology. It's the key to understanding this place." The crew gathered around, their eyes wide with anticipation, but they couldn't shake the feeling that the moment they touched it, or even approached it too closely, the judgment the alien voice had warned them about would come to pass. The chamber was silent, save for the faint hum of the glowing crystal at its center. The crew of the Erebus stood in awe, their breath caught in their throats as they slowly approached the pedestal. The strange symbols on the walls seemed to pulse with energy, shifting in response to their presence, as though the very ship was alive and aware of their movements. Dr. Carter's fingers hovered just inches above the crystalline object, her pulse quickening. This is it," she murmured, voice barely audible, her mind reeling from the significance of the discovery. "This is the heart of the ship. It's more than technology. It's something alive. An interface, maybe even a consciousness." The crystal itself seemed to glow brighter in response to her words, casting shifting shadows across the chamber. Harris stepped forward cautiously, his instincts screaming that they were nearing the tipping point. He held up his hand, signaling the crew to halt. "Hold back for a second," Harris commanded, his voice low but commanding. "We need to understand what we're dealing with here. We're not just dealing with a ship. We might be dealing with something that has the power to affect our entire future." The crew nodded, taking a step back, still mesmerized by the crystalline structure. Dr. Carter's mind was racing with possibilities. She had studied alien technology her entire career, but this was unlike anything she could have imagined. This wasn't just ancient machinery. This was the pulse of an entire civilization, possibly older than anything humanity had ever encountered. The silence was broken by a sudden, sharp tone, a mechanical sound that seemed to vibrate the very air around them. The crystal flared brightly, and then slowly it began to shift, morphing in shape as though it were reacting to something. From within the center of the glowing object, a stream of light shot upwards, creating an intricate web of beams that expanded outward, crisscrossing, and forming a complex, three-dimensional map that hovered in the air before them. The map was immense, stretching across the room, depicting what appeared to be an interconnected network of stars and planets, most of them unknown to Earth's astronomical charts. It was a map of an ancient empire, a civilization that spanned the galaxy long before humanity ever existed. As the light faded, the crew stood in stunned silence, realizing what they were seeing. The vast territorial reach of a race that had mastered not only the stars, but the very fabric of space itself. But then the light flickered again, and the hum of the crystal intensified. A voice, distorted and otherworldly, filled the room. It wasn't a human voice. It was something ancient, deeper than language, a tone that reverberated through the very bones of the crew. It was the same voice from the transmission, but this time, the message was clearer. "You have arrived." The words echoed with finality, and the crew tensed, uncertain of the next step. The crystal pulsed again, its light growing brighter, and the voice continued. "Judgment has been passed. Humanity is tested. You have trespassed in the domain of the ancients. Your fate will now be sealed." The air in the chamber grew thick with an oppressive energy, as though the very space around them was folding in on itself. The symbols on the walls shifted once more, and a wave of power swept through the room, as if the ship itself was awakening fully, coming to life in a way that neither the crew nor their technology could fully comprehend. "Judgment? What do you mean?" Dr. Carter shouted, her voice trembling. "We came in peace. We came to learn." But the voice was unmoved. The tone deepened, becoming almost a growl, as if the ship was speaking from some primordial alien consciousness. "Peace is not yours to offer. You have opened the door to the unknown. The price of knowledge is steep, and your reckoning is inevitable." Harris stepped forward, instinctively placing himself between the crew and the glowing pedestal. His hands were clenched into fists. "What do you want from us?" he demanded, his voice echoing with a mix of defiance and desperation. For a moment, there was no response. The light from the crystal dimmed, and the ship's hum faltered. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any of the threats they had faced so far. Then, the voice returned, its tone chilling. "The judgment will be one of two. You shall either ascend to the ranks of the ancients or be cast into the void. You will prove your worth through trials. Fail, and your kind will be forgotten." The room trembled as a new set of symbols emerged on the walls, pulsing with energy. It was an undeniable challenge, a test that would decide humanity's future. The crystal's glow intensified once more, lighting up the entire chamber with an otherworldly brilliance. "Get ready," Harris whispered, staring into the heart of the alien technology. "This is only the beginning." The chamber trembled with a low, resonant hum as the ship's heart, the glowing crystal, flared to life once again. The ancient voice filled the room, its tone heavy with judgment and power. "You stand at the threshold of the ancients' dominion. To prove your worth, you must endure the trials. Only through triumph will you be granted the right to ascend. Fail, and your kind will be erased from existence." The words sent a chill through the crew, their bodies tensing at the gravity of what had been said. Harris felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. These were no mere tests. These were trials that would determine humanity's place in the universe, whether they would rise to greatness or be forgotten like so many others before them. "How do we start?" Dr. Carter asked, her voice barely a whisper as she looked up at the glowing symbols that were now pulsing on the walls. Harris turned to face her, his expression grim but resolute. "We're going to have to trust in our skills. Our survival depends on it." The symbols on the walls began to shift rapidly, rearranging into complex geometric shapes that defied the laws of physics. At the same time, the floor of the chamber cracked open, revealing a glowing pathway that led deeper into the ship's heart. A door, unlike any they had seen before, materialized at the end of the path. A door forged from the same shimmering energy that had enveloped the fleet upon their arrival. It hummed with a power that seemed to reverberate in the very core of the Erebus. "This is it," Harris said, stepping forward. "We're entering the heart of the trial now. Everyone stay focused." The crew followed closely, their movements cautious but determined. As they crossed the threshold, the environment around them shifted, changing as though the ship itself was responding to their presence. The walls morphed into a translucent lattice of shimmering light, creating a vast, alien landscape that stretched infinitely in all directions. The crew was no longer standing in a physical space. They were inside a living, breathing construct, a manifestation of the trials ahead. Suddenly, a booming voice, now both familiar and terrifying, echoed around them. The first trial begins. You will face the test of knowledge. Only those who understand the true nature of the universe may pass. Before them, an array of holographic screens materialized, displaying an overwhelming flood of information, ancient star maps, complex equations, and alien symbols they could not begin to decipher. The crew was tasked with unlocking the secrets of this knowledge, and failure meant the end. "Start analyzing, now," Dr. Carter shouted, immediately taking control. Her mind raced, trying to piece together the information in front of her. The equations were like nothing she had ever seen, but she recognized some patterns, ancient formulas, perhaps the very foundation of space-time itself. "I need more time," she muttered, her fingers flying over the air, tracing through the holographic displays. "These symbols, they're linked. But to what? What's the key?" The pressure was mounting, and Harris could feel the weight of the trial press against his chest. He knew that this test was about more than just decoding alien symbols. It was a measure of humanity's ability to comprehend the vast mysteries of the universe. Humanity had always been defined by its thirst for knowledge, its drive to push beyond the known, to seek out answers no matter the cost. But even as the pressure mounted, the feeling of being watched grew stronger, more oppressive. The crystal from the pedestal above them still glowed, its energy pulsating like the heartbeat of an ancient entity, waiting for their response. "We can't fail," Harris muttered under his breath, the urgency of the moment now pushing him beyond rational thought. "This is the only chance we have." Dr. Carter, working frantically, managed to decipher a fragment of the alien code, piecing it together with a series of equations that began to make sense. I think we're being tested on how we perceive and interact with the fabric of the universe. The relationships between energy, matter, and time. It's all here, encoded in a way we can only begin to understand." The more she deciphered, the more the room seemed to respond, shifting and pulsing with light, as if it were alive, feeding on their understanding. They were nearing the answer, but the strain was becoming unbearable. And then, without warning, a sharp, violent tremor shook the entire room. The voice, now distorted and crackling, spoke once more. "You have 10 seconds to complete the test. Fail, and your judgment will be sealed." The countdown began. Dr. Carter's heart raced as she scrambled to complete the equation, her mind firing on all cylinders. She could feel the eyes of the ancients upon them, watching, waiting for their response. As the final moments ticked away, the last symbol clicked into place. The holographic screens shimmered, then disappeared, leaving only silence behind. Harris held his breath, as the ground beneath them seemed to pause, as though the entire ship were holding its breath. Then the voice spoke again, this time with an air of finality. "The test of knowledge is passed. You have proven your worth. The second trial shall now commence." The darkness was absolute, swallowing them whole as the crew of the Erebus stood in stunned silence. They had completed the first trial, an overwhelming test of knowledge. But now, as the voice of the ancients echoed in their minds, they understood that their journey was far from over. "The second trial begins," the voice intoned, its tone deep and implacable. "You must face the trial of will. Only those with the strength to endure the most profound tests of the soul will survive. Prove your resolve, or be cast into the abyss." A chill ran down Harris's spine. The first trial had been challenging, but it had tested their intellect. This, however, was different. The trial of will would push them to the very limits of their endurance, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. The darkness around them shifted. Slowly, ethereal lights began to flicker, outlining shapes, figures, and scenes, visions of impossibly distant places, of wars and peace, creation and destruction. Each scene was a mirror, reflecting human history, but twisted, altered, magnified. It felt as though they were being drawn into the very heart of the galaxy's greatest struggles, humanity's triumphs and failures. And through it all, they could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on them. Dr. Carter, still reeling from the aftermath of the first trial, turned to Harris. This isn't just a test of endurance. It's a test of our very humanity. It's forcing us to confront our darkest truths. Harris's jaw clenched. We're not just being watched. We're being judged. Every choice we've made, every mistake, every success, it's all on display. But we have to push through. We can't afford to fail. The crew felt it then, the tug of an unseen force, drawing them toward the center of the chamber. One by one, they were enveloped in a wave of light. The air around them thickened, and they were no longer standing in the ship's chamber. They were standing in a vast, empty space, one that seemed to stretch on forever. The stars they had seen outside were gone, replaced by an unsettling void. And then the visions began. Harris found himself in the midst of a war zone, fighting on the front lines of a distant future where humanity had colonized the stars. He saw the faces of soldiers, young, scared, and determined, charging forward as explosions rocked the landscape. The weight of command pressed heavily on his shoulders. His decisions, his actions, would mean the difference between life and death for thousands. He could feel the strain in his chest, the burden of responsibility threatening to break him. He staggered, falling to his knees, the weight of the war too much to bear. A voice echoed in his mind, reminding him of every failure, every decision that had cost lives. Do you have the will to endure this, to carry the weight of your choices? But Harris forced himself to stand, his fists clenched. I have to keep going. For them. For humanity. As he rose, the scene shifted. Dr. Carter, too, was pulled into her own vision. She found herself in a cold, sterile lab, staring at a device she had created, a piece of technology designed to cure a deadly disease that had ravaged millions. But in this reality, her invention had failed. The disease spread uncontrollably, and humanity was on the brink of extinction. The faces of the dying, the people she had failed, stared back at her, accusing her for her inability to save them. Tears welled in her eyes. I should have done more. I could have done more. But then, the words of a mentor she had long forgotten echoed in her mind. Failure is not the end. It is the beginning of understanding. Will you give up, or will you rise again? With a shuddering breath, Dr. Carter wiped away her tears. I will rise, she whispered. The visions continued to assault them. Each crew member was forced to face their own darkest memories and greatest fears. The trial of will was not just a test of their physical strength, but of their character, their ability to endure, to push through despair, and to emerge stronger than before. Harris, Dr. Carter, and the others began to emerge from their personal trials, one by one. It was clear now that the ship wasn't just testing their abilities. It was shaping them, forging them in the fires of hardship, preparing them for something far greater. When the last of the visions faded, they stood together, gasping for air as though they had just come through a storm. The room had returned to its previous state, but now there was an overwhelming silence. They had passed the trial of will, but they knew the final test was yet to come. The voice of the ancients once again filled the air. The trials have revealed your strength, your resolve. The final judgment is upon you. Prepare yourselves for the ultimate test of humanity. The crew exchanged determined looks. The end was near, and whatever came next, they would face it together. The room faded back into darkness, and the crew stood, hearts pounding, realizing they had only just begun the gauntlet. The trials had only just begun, and what came next would push them beyond anything they had ever faced before.